Have you ever shown up for your own family and they acted like you didn't exist? Not forgot, not missed, just erased. On purpose. This is my revenge story, but it didn't start with anger. It started with silence and a security checkpoint at West Point. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, your name's not on the guest list." The soldier at the gate was young, maybe 20, fresh out of training. He looked nervous delivering the line, but he stood firm, like it was the 4th time he'd said it that morning. I held my military cap tight in one hand and my ID folder in the other. The April wind brushed past the white pillars of the entrance, carrying the sound of camera shutters and happy reunions from families behind me. Applause echoed down the stone path. "I'm family," I said calmly. "Captain Nathan Rowe's sister." He squinted at the clipboard again. "I've got Nathan Rowe listed along with his wife Emily, his parents Richard and Lorraine Rowe. But not you, ma'am. No Evelyn Rowe." I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I'd had over a decade to prepare for moments like this. "Understood," I said quietly, stepping aside so I wouldn't block the other guests. I adjusted the black coat I wore over my uniform, covering the medals pinned across my chest. Even my rank insignia was tucked just out of sight. As I moved back toward the edge of the pathway, I saw them, my family. Dad still walked with that military-perfect posture, his retired colonel's uniform pressed sharper than any civilian could pull off. Mom, elegant in a blue formal suit, held onto her purse like it was a badge of honor. And Nathan, my younger brother, walked between them like a war hero, chest out, smile wide, medals flashing in the morning light. Nathan saw me. He paused, just for a moment, eyebrows lifting. "What's going on?" he asked. But not to the guard, to me. No warmth, just curiosity, like I was some logistical hiccup. "They don't have me on the list," I said simply. He gave a half shrug and that crooked smile I'd seen since we were kids. "Probably some admin mix-up. You know how clerks are." Then, without another word, he turned to Mom and Dad and kept walking, just like that. "No, hey, let me fix this. No, she's with us. Not even a, that's my sister." The guard didn't know what to do next. He looked at me again. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to clear the entrance area." I nodded. "Of course." So I stepped off to the side, found a shaded spot beneath a column, and waited. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel surprised. This was just another version of what my family had done my whole life. Erase me from the frame and carry on like I was never there. But what they didn't know, what they'd never bothered to ask, was who I'd become. I wasn't just Nathan's older sister. I wasn't the girl who worked in D.C., or the one who never really settled down. I wasn't just Evelyn, the quiet one. I was Major General Evelyn Rowe, Strategic Intelligence Command. I'd run classified operations across 3 continents. I'd saved lives, including my brother's, without ever being seen. And on that morning, at West Point, I wasn't even worthy of a name badge. I stayed hidden under my coat as guests filed through, name after name called with cheer and formality. The names on the list, the ones that mattered. People waved, hugged, took selfies. Some posed beside the cadet statues. Others snapped pictures of Nathan as he smiled beside our father, who wore every last military commendation he'd ever earned. My father never looked back once, not even a glance. They'd all gone in, and I was still standing outside, wrapped in black wool, burning quietly from the inside out. At some point, the guard gave me a nod. Not recognition, more like confusion. "I'm going to need to close this side off now, ma'am," he said gently. "No problem," I said, and I meant it, because I wasn't there for them. I was there for something else entirely. You see, I had received a call 3 days earlier from someone who did know who I was, and in less than 30 minutes that someone would arrive. He wouldn't need a list. He wouldn't need proof. He would say 5 words, loud, clear, and in front of everyone. "Welcome, General Evelyn Rowe." And then, for the first time in my life, my family would have to watch me walk past them. Not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman who commanded silence and finally broke it. I used to think maybe I was exaggerating. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe my parents really did love me, just in their own awkward military way. But memories don't lie. Not when they come uninvited. Not when they hit you like shrapnel while you're standing at the gate of a ceremony for your brother, and you're not even listed as family. The wind that morning reminded me of another wind. Another morning. I was 14. Nathan was 12. We were in the backyard, both in uniform, but different kinds. He had Dad's old ROTC jacket on, 3 sizes too big, dragging behind his sneakers. I wore a navy blue blazer I'd bought with babysitting money. I was prepping for a statewide science fair. I'd made it to the final round. "You coming to my showcase?" I asked Dad. "It's at 10 a.m. He glanced up from his newspaper. "Science fair?" he asked. "Is that the thing with the volcano projects?" "I'm doing predictive signal theory," I said quietly. "It's not a volcano." He nodded vaguely. "Let me check with your mom." He never came. Nathan, on the other hand, had learned how to do 12 perfect push-ups by that weekend. Dad brought out a camcorder, filmed it like it was the Normandy landing. "That's my boy," he shouted. "Future soldier." That clip still sits on our living room shelf, burned onto DVD and labeled Nathan Training Day 1. There's no DVD with my name on it, not even from my college graduation. The worst part? I got used to it. At 18, when I told them I'd accepted an ROTC scholarship and was going into military intelligence, Dad frowned like I'd just said I was joining a circus. "Intel," he said, folding his arms. "So, what, a desk job?" "It's strategic operations," I explained. "Threat assessment, counterintelligence, field command." "Sounds like a support role," Mom chimed in, stirring tea in her favorite china cup. "Well, not everyone's cut out for combat, dear, but I'm sure you'll be helpful." That word, helpful, like I was a nurse handing someone else the medal. Maybe some of you understand that kind of dismissal, the kind where it's not loud or cruel, just subtle, polite, icy. Like no matter how hard you work, how far you rise, they've already decided who you are. If you've ever been there, drop a comment, even just one word. I read them. It helps to know I'm not alone. Because that's what it was like for me. A lifetime of not being enough in the only eyes I ever wanted to shine in. Even when I got deployed, they never asked for details. "Still in D.C.?" Mom would ask at Thanksgiving. "Just got back from overseas," I'd reply carefully. "Oh, did you bring the cranberry sauce?" Once I was awarded a medal for directing the evacuation of 27 U.S. civilians from an embassy compound during an attack. I didn't tell them. I knew how it would go. They'd nod, then ask about Nathan's promotion. He became a captain. Dad called everyone, sent a mass email with pictures, bought a plaque. When I got promoted to Major General, I got an automatic email from HR and a silent walk home. They didn't know, but I didn't let them know either. Because after a while, the silence stops being an accident and starts feeling like protection. I remember sitting on the floor of a hotel room in Belgium after an intelligence summit with NATO. High-ranking officers from 5 countries had just applauded my briefing. I'd been told, behind closed doors, that my work may have prevented a regional war. That night, I called home. Mom picked up. "How was your trip?" she asked. "Intense," I said. "But good. We may have diffused something before it escalated." "Oh, Nathan said he's thinking of applying to the command school in Arizona. Isn't that exciting?" I remember staring at the ceiling. I didn't even say goodbye. I just handed the phone to voicemail. The most surreal part? For a long time, I didn't hate them for it. I blamed myself. I told myself I hadn't explained well enough, that I hadn't tried hard enough to share my world with them. I invited them to events. I sent pictures. I offered to fly them out to my promotion ceremony, secretly held off base under tight security. They never came. They always had a reason. Too far, too busy, too much Nathan going on. So eventually, I stopped sending the invitations. It felt better than waiting for the silence afterward. But somewhere deep inside me, a question kept echoing. If I ever did something that truly mattered, would they even see it? And then came Operation Granite Flame, a high-stakes mission, a battlefield tangled in lies and death. Nathan's unit was about to walk into a trap. A satellite discrepancy set off a red flag. I caught it. I made the call. I rerouted their movement minutes before contact. They lived. Nathan lived. And my name wasn't even in the debrief. He came home to applause. I came back to paperwork. He got a medal. I filed the threat report. And my parents? They didn't even know I'd been in the region. Maybe they thought I was still in D.C., sitting at some desk, being helpful. 15 years. That's how long I worked in the shadows. 15 years of flying under fake names, sleeping 3 hours a night, drinking coffee that tasted like engine oil, and carrying secrets I could never share with anyone. Not my friends, not my neighbors, and definitely not my family. To them, I was the quiet sister who worked in some office job in Washington. Maybe something with logistics, or my mom once guessed, foreign education outreach. That made me laugh so hard I cried later in my car. Because what I really did? I ran counterintelligence operations for Strategic Command. I directed global threat assessments and orchestrated operations that prevented bombings, hostage crises, and covert attacks. I watched real-time drone feeds as friendly units moved through danger. I made decisions that saved lives, sometimes dozens, by spotting a small pattern no one else saw. But at every family dinner, I was the one bringing store-bought pie. The first mission I ever led on my own was in northern Jordan, near the border with Syria. We'd intercepted a chatter trail pointing to a mobile bomb-making hub disguised as a school. I had 36 hours to verify, locate, and coordinate a strike without triggering civilian casualties. The intel team under my command worked in shifts around the clock, sleep-deprived, dehydrated, half the time running on adrenaline and black coffee. At 3:48 a.m., our data confirmed movement near a known explosives transport route. We acted, and when the dust cleared, the building was empty, except for steel barrels filled with ammonium nitrate, timing devices, and encrypted communications gear. Not a single shot fired, not a single innocent harmed. We called it Operation Quicksand. Nobody back home ever heard that name. It was classified and stayed that way. A few weeks later, Nathan came home on leave. We both happened to be visiting for Dad's birthday. He held court, telling stories about being pinned down during patrol and calling in fire support. He looked at me once and said, "You ever been anywhere near a combat zone?" I looked at my mother. She didn't even blink. No one expected me to answer, and so I didn't. Because how do you explain that you were the one calling the plays while they charged forward, unaware someone was watching over them the whole time? There's no medal for that, no family toast, just silence. A different kind of silence, the kind that fills up the spaces between people until you realize they'll never ask who you really are. Not because they're mean, but because they already decided who you were a long time ago. And if you ever tried to change that image, they'd shrug it off like you were being dramatic. So I let them believe what they wanted, that I sat behind a desk, that I lived a small, quiet life, that I was the one who just never quite measured up. I used to wonder, if I disappeared tomorrow, would they even notice anything missing beyond a holiday card or a casserole at Thanksgiving? And then came Operation Granite Flame, the mission that changed everything. Even if they wouldn't know it for years, it started with an anomaly, an odd blip on our satellite logs. We traced it to a fake convoy route in eastern Afghanistan. My gut said it was a trap. My team investigated for 36 hours straight. I overruled standard protocol. I pushed through a priority alert, and just in time. Nathan's unit had been rerouted to that sector due to a last-minute change. If they'd taken the original path, they would have walked right into an IED-laced death zone. But because of my team's report, they were redirected 10 minutes before impact. No casualties, no public recognition. Just a single line in a military log. Op Granite Flame, threat neutralized. Source, strategic intel, yo. That was it. Nathan never knew. He came home weeks later, talking about the mission like it was just another lucky break. He laughed and said, "Someone upstairs must have had our back that day." I just smiled and passed him the gravy. That's the thing about being in intelligence. If you do your job right, no one ever knows you were there. But that kind of invisibility wears on you, especially when your own family never saw you to begin with. Sometimes I'd sit in my apartment in D.C., medals tucked into drawers, mission files locked away in safes, coffee growing cold as I stared at a blinking cursor in a classified report, and wonder, what's the point of being a ghost in your own life? But the answer always came back, because if I didn't do it, no one else would. And that, I told myself, was enough. Until the day came when someone I deeply respected, called and said, "General Rowe, Operation Granite Flame has been declassified, and we'd like to recognize you in public." The past 15 years of silence cracked, just a little, enough for light to get in. What I didn't know was that the ceremony they chose to do it at was Nathan's, and for the first time, I wouldn't be the one applauding quietly in the back. I'd be the one they had to see. No shadows, no aliases, no coat to hide behind, just me, in uniform, rank visible, history intact, ready to walk into the light. It started with a phone call, one I almost didn't answer. It was a Tuesday morning, gray sky, quiet apartment, black coffee gone cold on the windowsill. I was home in D.C. for the first time in weeks, back from Berlin after briefing NATO's cyber counterintelligence unit. My suitcase was still half unpacked. I still had jet lag. I still hadn't opened the stack of mail Mom sent, mostly birthday cards I wasn't invited to sign. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me reach for the encrypted line, the one that only rings for 3 reasons: threat, deployment, or change. "General Rowe," I answered, voice steady. "Evelyn," said a deep, even voice. I knew it immediately. Lieutenant General Marcus Parker, head of strategic operations, my direct superior for the last 6 years. "Yes, sir," I said, straightening instinctively, even in my socks. "I hope you're sitting down." That line? That's how you know it's going to be a moment you remember. Operation Granite Flame has been officially declassified. Silence. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood too well. The operation that saved my brother's life. The one I ran start to finish. The one that was buried under layers of clearance and need to know. The one I never even hinted at during holidays or Skype calls. That operation was now public? Parker continued. "Not only that, the Department of Defense has approved a Distinguished Service Cross for your leadership on Granite Flame. You'll be receiving it at the West Point ceremony next Saturday." My hand froze midair, halfway to my coffee. I almost laughed, because of course it was that ceremony. Of course it was the one I didn't get invited to, the one celebrating Nathan's Silver Star. "There's something else," Parker added, as if the punchline hadn't landed yet. "You'll be awarded right after your brother, in the same auditorium, full command in attendance." My chest tightened, not in fear, in something older, something sharp. They were finally going to say my name, in the same room where my family had tried for years to forget it. I didn't speak. The silence stretched just long enough that Parker finally said, softer this time, "I know your family situation, Rowe. I've never pried, but I've observed." I closed my eyes. "They don't know who I am," I whispered. "Do you want to tell them beforehand?" He asked gently. "We can adjust protocol if needed." And for a second, I almost said yes, almost gave them a chance to brace, to spin it, to save face. But then I thought of every Thanksgiving where Nathan gave speeches and Dad clapped like a senator. Every time I handed Mom a framed photo from an awards ceremony and she blinked like she didn't understand what it meant. Every time they called my job support work while my reports held lives in balance. And I said simply, "No, sir. Let them see it like I lived it. Unexpected." Parker didn't press. He knew that kind of wound couldn't be managed with protocol. "Understood. You'll have 10 minutes for remarks. Dress uniform, no coat." "Copy," I said, voice steady again. He paused a beat before hanging up. "You've done a lot for this country, General. It's about damn time someone stood up and said so." When the line went dead, I sat there staring at the phone for what felt like forever. 15 years of silence. 15 years of watching my family celebrate Nathan like he was the only legacy worth remembering. 15 years of lowering my voice around the dinner table and watching them lean away when I talked. And now, in the most ironic twist imaginable, I was going to be pinned with the Distinguished Service Cross in front of the very people who once called my work clerical at my brother's ceremony. Right after he spoke, I sat with that, not in anger, just awe. There's a strange kind of ache that comes when truth finally rises to the surface. Not because it hurts, but because you stopped believing it ever could. I spent the rest of the day prepping, pulled out my dress blues, pressed every seam, checked every ribbon, polished every pin. The uniform felt heavier than usual, but not in a bad way, in a real way. That night, I stood on my balcony and looked out over the city. D.C. gleamed below, steady, lit, moving, and I thought about the moment ahead. What would Dad do when they called my name? Would Mom even recognize me? Would Nathan understand? And then I realized none of that mattered, because for the first time, I wasn't showing up to be accepted. I was showing up because I had earned the right to be seen, not as someone's sister, not as the quiet one, but as General Evelyn Rowe. And when Parker stepped up to that mic and the lights shifted and the crowd leaned in, I wouldn't flinch. I wouldn't hide. I'd stand. And they would finally have to look. Not because I forced them, but because I no longer needed their permission to be visible. That was the shift. That was the moment, and it started with 5 words I'd waited my entire life to hear. We now honor General Rowe. The air in the West Point Auditorium was sharp and ceremonial. Polished shoes clicking on marble, rows of dress uniforms, brass shining under overhead lights. Every movement had a rhythm. Every face had pride carved into it. And me? I sat alone, front VIP row just left of center, not far from the stage, yet miles from where my family sat. They were in the honored family section. 4 seats together, close enough to be caught on camera during the Silver Star presentation. Mom looked pristine in a navy blue skirt suit. Dad wore his old colonel's uniform, buttons aligned like stars. Nathan looked confident, radiating approval, as if the day had always belonged to him. He never once turned around. He didn't know I was there. Not yet. I shifted in my seat and smoothed down my uniform. Full dress blues, rank exposed. No coat this time. Not today. I wore every ribbon, every bar, every reminder of the 15 years I spent proving myself in places they couldn't pronounce. No shadows anymore. The ceremony began with the usual speeches, commanding officers, school deans, honorary guests. People applauded in all the right places. Then came the moment the auditorium had been waiting for. We now recognize Captain Nathan Rowe for heroic conduct during Operation Granite Flame. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. People stood. I stayed seated, not from spite, but because I already knew the full truth. Nathan stepped onto the stage, sharp in his uniform, his posture perfect, his voice steady. He talked about the mission, about leading his team through enemy terrain, about protecting civilians under fire. He thanked his unit. He thanked the commanding officers. He thanked our father for being the soldier I always wanted to become. He thanked our mother for holding the family together during the hard months. And then he was done. No mention of me. Not even a passing nod to a sister who once held his life in her hands from halfway across the world. I didn't expect it, but God, it still stung. Then came a pause. The stage cleared slightly. The lights adjusted. The room settled. A senior officer stepped up to the mic, not a regular MC. Lieutenant General Marcus Parker. His voice rang like steel against silence. Before we close today's ceremony, there is one final recognition. Heads turned, whispers rippled across the room. This past year, a mission known as Operation Granite Flame saved the lives of multiple U.S. soldiers, including the unit led by Captain Nathan Rowe. People murmured. The name was familiar. It had just been in Nathan's citation. What was this? Today, we honor the commander whose intelligence leadership prevented that unit from walking into a deadly ambush. Parker paused, a silence thick enough to feel. Please rise as we welcome the officer behind Granite Flame, Major General Evelyn Rowe. Every head turned. Mine was already rising. I stood. And for a breathless second, the entire auditorium froze. Then, applause. Slow at first, scattered, then thunderous, then standing. I stepped forward. My boots echoed on the polished floor. I didn't look at the crowd, not yet. I looked straight at Parker. He nodded, his eyes proud, a small smile. Then he stepped aside, letting the light fall entirely on me. I reached the stage. He opened a small velvet box. Inside, the Distinguished Service Cross. For extraordinary service, unshakable command, and for protecting American lives with brilliance and precision, General Rowe, we thank you. I saluted, took the medal, then turned. Only then did I let my eyes sweep across the room. I found them instantly. Dad stiff in his chair, mouth slightly open. Mom, one hand covering her lips. Nathan, frozen like someone had hit pause. His body leaned forward as if he wanted to move, but didn't know how. And then, a voice. Who is she? It came from Nathan, out loud, to the room. The silence that followed was seismic. Parker stepped up to the mic again. She's your sister, Captain Rowe. The entire auditorium looked from him to me and back. And she's the reason your team made it home. I watched Nathan blink. Once. Twice. I saw it land. Not just the words, but the weight of the years they stood on. My eyes didn't waver. I stepped to the podium. No notes. I didn't need them. I was told I'd have 10 minutes, but I'll only take 2, I began. I've spent the last 15 years serving this country, not for medals, not for press releases, but because every life we protect matters, even when no one knows you're there. I'm proud of my brother, truly, but I hope today reminds us all that some battles are won long before boots hit the ground, and that recognition, when earned, should never depend on whether you were invited. I stepped down. Applause swelled again, louder this time. As I walked off stage, I passed the family section. Dad stood slowly, like his legs didn't want to accept what his heart just did. Mom wiped her eyes, shaking. Nathan didn't move, but his hand gripped the back of the chair in front of him like he needed something to hold on to. And for once, just once, I didn't feel like the ghost in the Rowe family photo. I felt like I had a name, a rank, a story, and they had no choice but to hear it. I don't remember how long I stood on that stage. I remember the applause, the weight of the medal on my chest, the feeling of fabric tightening around my shoulders as I took the first full breath I'd taken in years. But what I remember most was my father standing. Richard Rowe, retired colonel, career man, military man, the same man who once said, "Intelligence work is just background noise," stood up from his seat, took 2 steps toward the aisle, and locked eyes with me. He looked stunned, like the truth had hit him so hard it knocked his rank off his spine. He didn't say a word, but his eyes were softer than I'd ever seen. It was like he was looking at me for the first time, not as the daughter or the helper, but as something he'd never imagined, an equal. Mom reached for his arm. She was already crying, holding a handkerchief she'd probably brought for Nathan, but now clutched like it was the only thing tethering her to the moment. Nathan still hadn't moved. He just sat there, his chest rising like someone had knocked the air out of him. He'd heard it out loud, in front of the entire military auditorium. "She's the reason your team made it home." That kind of sentence. It doesn't vanish after a round of applause. It stays, echoes, wears through your pride like water through stone. After the ceremony, people flooded toward me, officers I'd worked with across continents, soldiers I'd briefed but never met face to face, commanders from NATO and Central Command. They all had one thing in common. They knew who I was, and for the first time, so did my family. Dad waited until the crowd thinned, then he walked toward me, deliberate, slow. Every step seemed to cost him something, but he took it anyway. He stood in front of me and took off his cap, not because it was regulation, because it was respect. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "You didn't just serve. You led. You protected. You carried this family's name farther than I ever did, and I never saw it." I didn't say anything. I couldn't, not with my throat closing up like that. Then he did something I hadn't felt since I was 10 years old. He hugged me, arms tight, real, not out of obligation, but because he finally saw me. Mom joined, trembling, wiping her face as she kissed my cheek and whispered, "I didn't understand, Evelyn, but I will now. I promise." Nathan approached last. He didn't say much, just handed me a folded piece of paper and muttered, "You'll know what to do." Later, back in my apartment, I opened it, a formal transfer request. Nathan had applied to Strategic Intelligence Command, my unit. Reason for request: to learn from the commander I once underestimated. It took me 10 minutes to stop staring at the line. The next morning, I handwrote a letter. "Nathan, you don't need to serve under me to prove anything. You've always been a good soldier, even when you didn't understand the quiet kind of fight I fought. But if you ever want to sit down, have dinner, no ranks, no titles, just brother and sister, I'll be there. Evelyn." A week later, I got a note in return, on a torn page from a training manual. "Read your letter. Understood. I'm proud of you, sis. I'm sorry it took me too long." That weekend, I was invited back to the Rowe family home. For the first time in years, there on the once sacred military wall that had only ever displayed photos of Dad and Nathan, hung a new frame. A photo of me on the West Point stage, metal gleaming, hand at salute. Underneath it, Major General Evelyn Rowe, our daughter, not the office worker, not the quiet one, not Nathan's sister, our daughter. For the first time, I felt like I didn't have to earn my place anymore. I had already earned it. And now, finally, they knew. Dear listener, have you ever carried the weight of being underestimated for years, then finally had your moment? Maybe it was in front of people who ignored you your whole life. Maybe it was quiet, just a sentence, a look, a change. If you've ever lived that shift, from invisible to undeniable, tell me about it, even just one sentence. I read every one, because these stories aren't just mine, they're ours. And sometimes, knowing you're not alone is the most powerful recognition of all.